Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And so my name is Laura Kupe, and I am one of the co-founders of Congolese Diaspora Impact Strategies. And of course, we are well known for putting on the Congolese Diaspora Impact Summits. And thank you for joining us for our inaugural Congo Chat. So CDIS will be putting on a series of Congo Chats focused on various topics, and our first Congo Chat will be today's, which is focused on the geopolitics and security issues taking place in the DRC. Our next one will be May 31st, focused on understanding the Congolese mining ecosystem. And then we'll have our latest one, our July one, on July 26th, focused on agribusiness and importing and exporting Congolese goods. So today's Congo Chat, we think, is extremely timely given that everything that's going on in the DRC, as well as the US's engagement and other global actors when it pertains to developments in DRC. And related to that, I think we have the best panel ever of great perspectives based on the biographies and career paths that these individuals have taken. And so we're going to have a discussion with Muadi Mukenge of the Congolese Studies Association, Fred Bauma of Ebuteli, and Dr. Yvan Ilunga from Salve, Regina University. So before I start our discussion, I'm just going to quickly read their bios so that we are all familiar with the amazing work that they have done. And then, of course, I'll also just provide like a quick overview of the latest developments. Again, I think the dynamics related to DRC and the Great Lakes region are ever evolving. And so we'll just do a quick overview of that so we kind of know the latest state of play. I will ask our panelists a couple of questions, probably for about 30 minutes, and then we'll, of course, have some Q&A. So please have your questions ready. You can put them in the chat box, and then, of course, when it comes to Q&A time, that we will go ahead and read them. So first, I will start with Dr. Yvan Ilunga. So he is an assistant professor of political science and international relations, and serves also as the associate director of that same program at Salve Regina, where he teaches undergrad, master's, and PhD level courses. He's a strategic thinker and scholar with over 15 years of experience working, advising, and conducting relevant policy research focused on Africa's security, development, and governance issues. He also has works and consults with international organizations, government agencies, think tanks, and business consulting firms. And also, again, his work touches a broad array of topics. So his question, or the questions that he looks at, include humanitarian action, civil military relations, natural resources conflicts, and regional cooperation. And he holds a PhD in global affairs from Rutgers University. And I forgot to also mention that, of course, CDIS is there to highlight the perspectives of Congolese in the diaspora and in the Congo. So also, this is a panel full of individuals of Congolese descent. And then next we have Fred Bauma, who's the executive director of Ebuteli. Ebuteli is a Congolese research institute focused on the politics, governance, and violence that is currently happening in DRC. Ebuteli means staircase in Lingala, and it aims to promote, through its rigorous research, informed debate to find solutions to many of the challenges facing the DRC. He's also a leading commentator on Congolese politics, and he is also a senior fellow at New York University Center for International Cooperation. And then he also worked as the director of the Congo Study Group, also based at NYU. He's also a member of Lutte pour le Changement, the Lucha movement, the largest pro-democracy social movement in the DRC. And then he holds a business administration degree from the Université Libre des Pays des Grands Lacs in Goma, and a master's degree from the city of New York in public administration. And then lastly, we have Muadi Mukenge, who's a tireless human rights and equitable development advocate, especially for the DRC. She brings over 25 years of program leadership, grant making, fundraising, and communications experience in the fields of international philanthropy, development, women's rights, and global health. Most recently, she led fundraising and communications functions at 2 international women's rights organizations for the last 5 years. She's also an alum of, so she worked with Emory University and Karna, overseeing the CDC's initiatives focused on HIV and AIDS. She's also worked on special initiatives in sub-Saharan Africa for the Global Fund for Women. So from 2004 to 2016, she worked on the fund's Growing Francophone Africa work. And then also during that, from 2014 to 2016, she managed a partnership between the Global Fund for Women and the Office of the United Nations Special Envoy for the Great Lakes to include women in the peace processes in the Congo. And then also, as I mentioned, Muadi is representing the Congolese Studies Association, an independent professional society established in the US to promote research, international cooperation, and exchange meaningful ideas and dialogue on the DRC. She's also a board member of Priority Africa Network and the Eastern Congo Initiatives. And she also holds a master's degree in African Studies from UCLA and a bachelor's degree in political science from Davidson College. So we have a very esteemed and knowledgeable panel, which I'm really excited about. And then, so before we dive into some questions, just wanted to kind of scene set. We talked with the panelists already that there's a lot of interesting things happening in the DRC. So yesterday, for example, the United States, Rwanda, and the DRC signed a declaration yesterday here in Washington where I am based, pledging mutual respect for sovereignty and to halt the military support of armed groups. And this declaration is now it's supposed to lead to a draft peace agreement by May 2nd to address the escalating violence that we have seen in Eastern DRC, namely the Kivu, since late January. And of course, we know that there's always been a resurgence or fluctuations in that, but the latest resurgence of that was in January. And so some key highlights from that agreement. So the countries, so DRC and Rwanda, said that they would mutually acknowledge each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity and commit to a way forward. The agreement or the statement of principles did not specifically name M23, which is the rebel movement that's been or the instability has been attributed to the M23 rebel movement, although not explicitly mentioned in the agreement. Said that the parties agreed that the countries would refrain from providing state military support to non-state armed groups. Another key thing, again, it was that, and I talked to Dr. Ilunga about it, another interesting development was that the two sides expected significant investments facilitated by the US government and US private sector related to areas like mineral value chains and hydropower development. And then, of course, there was also an element from Wednesday that the DRC and the M23 rebels had agreed to halt fighting in the east. So lots happening there. Of course, unfortunately, due to the instability, we've seen hundreds of thousands of individuals displaced, thousands of deaths. So of course, we find that incredibly troubling. Also, some interesting news, of course, former DRC President Joseph Kabila said he plans to get back into the mix. So that's an interesting development. And of course, for those of us who are based in the US, of course, the US has placed sanctions on 2 individuals, so James Kabarebe and Lawrence Kayunga Kingston, who have ties to the M23 movement, so at least the United States has attributed responsibility towards them, M23 being a destabilizing factor. And then, of course, other countries in the West have followed suit. And then this is also happening in the midst of a growing demand for Congo's minerals. There's a demand for electrical vehicles, other emerging technologies, and of course the Chinese government, Chinese firms, including to other actors, including folks from the UAE, have economic interest in the DRC. So there's a lot at play, and we have lots to cover. So I at least wanted to set that scene. So I will direct my first question at Professor Ilunga, but of course, Muadi and Fred, feel free to intervene or say something. This is a conversation, so looking forward to having a very dynamic conversation. So my first question is for Professor Ilunga. So how would you describe the current geopolitical and power dynamics taking place in the Great Lakes region? So maybe let me pause there.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me, Laura, and their team. It is a privilege to talk about the DRC, but also sometimes it's huge responsibility because there is a high level of unpredictability when it comes to political and security development of the DRC. So whatever I say today may change in the next few hours. So what I'm trying to say here is that we all are analyzing this reality as it evolves, but trying to establish some pillars or some considerations which will exist beyond the current political dynamics. So talking about the geopolitics of the Great Lakes region, of course, the Great Lakes region has, I think depending on who you ask, has many countries, but lately we have, I think the focus mostly around three. I would say the DRC, Uganda, and Rwanda, but I will try to touch a little bit on reality on South Sudan as well, because they are connected as a broader region. But when you think about the geopolitics of the Great Lakes region, I would say let's think about the reality of the DRC. And this is expanded in history. If we go back in 1960s, in the early 70s, we can still tell that the DRC, as the Congo and Zaire, was considered to be a strategic partner for both the US and somehow for also the so-called Soviet bloc. And that was at an ideological level. But that ideology was also expanded into the strategic interest of the region when we think about the minerals. But of course, I don't want to go back into the 19th century where we always know that there's been always an appetite for Congo's minerals or Congo's resources. But three things that I want to highlight today as we reflect on modern development of the geopolitics. And in the Great Lakes region, one, unfortunately, which has to come first is the economic interest. The economic interests where the DRC natural resources are needed to support and fuel global economy. So therefore, there is a global interest from state and private entities to try to grasp different resources. And of course, if you talk about coltan, maybe you think more on the eastern parts. But when you think about copper, you think about cobalt, you think about the southeastern part, which is the Great Katanga region. So that tells us that the Congo itself still is at the center of global interest. Some of them are regional players, others are global players far, but trying to play their engagement with the DRC. And here, for instance, we can tell we have Qatar, which I think we can talk a little bit about it as well as a middle power trying to strike a deal and lead to peace agreement. So that is the first point, telling that there is an economic interest. The second one, I think, is the security interest in the region. Of course, the region has been plagued into violent conflict for many years, where you have interstate conflict, but also intrastate fragilities, where we have many armed groups. And of course, many today we talk about the M23, but when you think about the ADF and these other groups with other type of ideologies, we understand that the Great Lakes region has a need for a rethinking of major security approaches to stabilize the region. And the third point I want to make here is the institutional conversation. And this is where I'll go probably back to the DRC itself. Of course, when we think about instability in the DRC, we can still see outside and internal enablers, but all this turns around the existence of strong or not strong institutions. And the DRC, at this point, I think, to move forward, will need to rethink about building its strong institutions, not only at the national level, but also at the provincial as well as local level. And this is where I think the geopolitics play, into it. When we think about the external support or interest that we see, these are, I think, limited at two levels, only economic and security, and less of institutional conversation. And I would stop there, but I think the institutional discussion is also as important as the economic and security conversation.
To Muadi and Fred, I saw a lot of nodding and whatnot. So I would, do you want to add anything?
I mean, I would just say that there is an opportunity to be holistic in the approach of rethinking the DRC. So I agree very much with Dr. Ilunga. We cannot sacrifice the humanity and the livelihoods and human development needs of the Congo. And so I think that's an opportunity for us to bring that to the table as the security and economic interests are being discussed, that we really focus on human security as well.
Fred, I don't know if you wanted to just add anything from your
Yeah,
vantage.
just the only thing that I agree absolutely with what Dr. Ilunga said, but the only thing that I will add on at least on the geopolitical chessboard as you frame it, is the role of both regional competition in the around DRC issues, the competition between East African community and also SADC. So in here you could see in the last 2 years the growing role of Kenya as a new actor in the DRC, both economically and also militarily, but also a traditional role of South Africa, also politically, economically, and in the security sector, which has been challenged, including in their last attempt of intervening under the SAMI DRC, the SADC mission. And I think also something that is new to some extent is also the role of these the growing role of this middle power like Qatar or Turkey or the Emirates to some extent in meddling in the conflict in DRC, which to the Qatari case, at least seems like it's going in some direction, but that will be also something to consider because it may play with other other factors.
Yeah. So Professor Ilunga, I have one follow-up question related to what you just mentioned. So how do you think that Congo should reframe its diplomatic strategy, given like Fred mentioned, there's middle powers. The United States has a renewed interest in the, I would say, yeah, the minerals, but also China's had a longstanding presence in the DRC's mining sector, again, specifically more so Katanga. So kind of, what would you say they should think about, given that there's new dynamics at play?
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. First, I think when we think about the DRC, we have to think about the DRC beyond its conflict as a state, as a nation. And this is where I think we have missed many opportunities because I always say it is dangerous when the politics and governance is being advanced based on birds, right? In other words, based on what seems to be appealing for the moment, or forgetting the long-term plans and need for a country to be established. And when we think about the diplomatic necessity for the DRC, I will put it into two. One is visibility, and two is sustainability. The country such as the DRC should not be reactionary. to global affairs and global issues. Talking about the minerals, for instance, we seem to be observing an interest or an interest within the country because outside players need the resources. In other words, when we see the US wanting our minerals, we see Qatar and other players such as China coming down, and then we start developing our strategies in terms of foreign policies and diplomatic approaches as a response to the need for the market and the need for international market. That, I think, has to change, and I'm seeing it's changing progressively, where I think we need to define our own foreign policies and try to run with it beyond the regimes and beyond mandate. So that one, so in other words, building visibility. So the DRC, it should be a brand by itself, and that brand needs to be sustained. And this is the second point on sustainability. And sustainability in diplomatic moves requires training, but also requires resources and requires messaging. Uh, and I think we have missed some of these opportunities where either we have the message, but we don't put the right resources. And I'm not only talking about logistical resources, I'm also talking about human resources in places where diplomacy should be implemented. And focusing on strategic players, I'm not sure if, I have to say this, I'm not sure if we have an ambassador appointed in Washington, D.C. right now, but I know for the few months we did not have, I think probably a year. So that tells us, at least on putting the right resources on strategic conversations and strategic places. And this is just to say diplomacy, as we need to move forward with the DRC, visibility is key, but we need to sustain it. And by sustaining it, it should not be a political messaging, but a diplomatic messaging where institutions and resources are being put in place to advance the broader DRC agenda, not a regional or provincial or personal agendas. I don't know if that answered the question.
For sure. And I guess since we're also, I know I don't want to sound like the typical American, but yes, you know, America is a huge power. And of course, we have a diaspora here. But also, do you have any thoughts on how do you think the United States should approach this current moment? Again, this peace deal, or at least this signing of the statement of principles was signed in Washington. It wasn't, of course, we saw Qatar make attempts last month, but it highlights that the United States has a role to play. So what are your thoughts on what could the US's role be in, of course, trying to bring peace and stability where there's conflict, but also in the DRC's economic development, and also welcome Fred and Muadi's thoughts as well, should they have them.
Yeah, I think I always say until we change the dynamic from US-Africa to Africa-US, we will be operating on the basis of US and outsiders' agendas. So technically, what I think the US will need to do, which should be coming from the DRC, is to establish our own national agenda and national development plans and attract outside players, the US, to see where our priorities are and expand or invest in those. Think about the Lobito corridor. It's also amazing to see that it's been signed in, but the logic, it's been signed through Angola, while we know that the key technical minerals will be coming from the DRC. We had another signing a few years ago with Zambia on critical minerals, while still under the facilitations of the US, which is great. I think the US is showing interest in terms of countering China, but I'm questioning first if the US is getting back in the DRC outside the China's purview. Are we seeing the genuine interest of the US in the DRC without the mindset of competition? Or are we getting the US back because China is taking the lead in some of these spaces? So if the US has to support and help the DRC, in this case. Yes, on the security front, I mentioned institutional reform, and that will go to security sector reforms, training, and other type of capabilities that the DRC need. And the US has the resources, the expertise, and the skills to support the DRC. But I think one advice maybe I may give to the US is say, get in the DRC and operate based on the DRC expectations and local dynamics, because they are quite different from our Western expectations and models of operandis. Until we accept to merge these two, we will try the DRC and come out quickly. So the DRC has its own reality. I think flexibility is needed from the US standpoint as well.
Thank you so much. So my next question is for Fred, since he's been on the ground. So given that Professor Ilunga, Dr. Ilunga provided a great overview of the regional dynamics, all the different players. Of course, unfortunately, some peace processes have not succeeded. So I guess my question is, what do you think the international community misunderstands about the DRC's security challenges? Or maybe they get it right, some things they get right, but I think especially you being on the ground, what do you think are some misconceptions and missed opportunities, especially that there've been a number of peace processes and deals made and have had mixed results?
Well, I think they get most things right, but I think that where I see the most important misunderstanding is on the framing of the conflicts in the Eastern DRC. And I think the problem of framing it in the wrong way also led to some solutions that are probably not appropriate. What am I talking about? The conflict in the Eastern DRC for many years has always been presented as a consequence of Rwandan genocide. It has been read in the lens of the Rwandan experience of the violence. And so whenever we try to resolve the conflict, or whenever international community is trying to get involved in the conflict, it doesn't see most of the time Rwanda as an actor itself that it has become in provoking violence. So it's like a perpetual victim. So somehow the experience of Congolese people are invisibilized. You read the conflict as a consequence of Rwanda, not as a tragedy of Congolese people for many years. And then you will hear things like FDLR all the time. But the experience of FDLR, like the Congolese experience of FDLR, has been deeply negative. They are the first victim. But if you read how people understand it and how policies are made around that question, it's as if we benefit from FDLR, which is not the case. So I think the framing of the conflict is one of the misunderstanding of this question. And this is where also the Congolese intellectuals and the Congolese government has a role to play in reading and writing the history of our conflict in our own words. So that is one thing. The other thing is also the fact that many international actors are acting as if they don't have the goal of helping resolve in a sustainable way the conflicts, but fixing the instability, fixing the violence, and getting away with a sort of negative peace. You can argue that it's not their responsibility to do everything in the place of the Congolese government, but the consequence is investing billions of dollars in peacekeeping missions, in humanitarian aid, and the problem that we are trying to resolve will continue to remain. So, and this goes back to what Yvan was saying. I think at some point the institutional question has to come. Like, if we want to resolve the conflict in the long run, we need to have a functional Congolese state, a functional diplomacy, a functional military, and public service that works, and that may necessitate other way of intervention. And the last thing is in economy, on the economy of the region. I think so here you will hear all conversation around mining, conflict minerals, and the one part of the people will say it's all about mining, and the other part will say it has nothing to do with mining. And I think we usually, even international actors, including NGOs, some NGOs, lack nuances on what exactly is the role that the mining sector is playing in fueling conflict, and in what cases the mining sector can help channel solutions, as what we saw recently with Alpha Min around Walikale, which I think is one of the positive example of the last years.
And then I guess what my final question before I move on to Muadi is, since, Ebuteli is a think tank, I was asking you, Mike, if you're gonna release reports, which you will. So I guess based on what you're seeing, especially as we're also hoping for peace in the region, is maybe what do you think, especially lawmakers, whether they're in Kinshasa, Washington, Geneva, what do you think are top 3 priorities that they should focus on? Or it could be less than 3, but just maybe what are priorities that you think they should focus on as they think about the future? Because especially you've been part of youth movements, you're part of the future. So especially having that lens, what do you think they should think about? Oh, you're on mute.
If I limit myself on only 3, I would say the first one is to end violence in DRC, and like in a very short term is ending violence, trying to get M23 to withdraw and Rwanda to withdraw. But then I think the 2 other things is one, the regional economy. I believe, and I've been saying this, there are examples of experiences that worked in the past, the CPGL and the hydropower, and I'm glad the hydropower project, somewhat hydropower language has been mentioned in that declaration principle. There are experiences where the 3 countries, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, and DRC, have mutual interest on some projects that continue to work even in the midst of conflict. And those economic interests and finding a way to build more economic interest in the region and build a shared prosperity in the region can be a second one. And there can also be a leverage for countries like Rwanda is very dependent on World Bank funding. So the US and other actors can use that as a leverage to obtain some progress on the peace side. And the last thing is on the Congolese side, to focus on rebuilding our military and rebuilding our diplomacy. And those 2 sectors has shown a lot of weaknesses, and somehow they have enabled Rwanda and Uganda and Burundi to do whatever they want in the region. We have multiplied by 3 the spending on the military. Is still very far from some countries here, but it's a lot of money compared to the military budgets of other countries in the Great Lake, and yet by now we don't really have an army. We count on many mercenaries to defend ourselves, and as long as we will be seen as a country with a lot of wealth, but without any capacity to protect itself, we will attract other aggressors. Today it's Rwanda, tomorrow it be Uganda and others. For us to be able to defend ourselves in the future, we need to work on some key aspects of our institutions.
Thank you so much, Fred. So my next question is from Muadi. So of course, as we've seen, usually, well, typically women experience the disproportionate effects of war, and you clearly have done a great deal of work in that space. So what opportunities exist there for integrating gender responsive solutions in any, peace agreements or any other steps taken forward to create peace in Eastern DRC? And then also, how do you think women-led organizations can play a role in these peace building efforts?
Women's organizations and coalitions have been pushing to make sure that there's a gender lens with peace processes, and often has had to push their way onto the table, all the way from Sun City. And so there's a very strong history of the women's movement making sure that the realities of women are on the table, that women's voices are part of the analysis. And I really feel that we need to make sure we don't separate women from the fact that, we live in Congo. So if the house is on fire, everything is a women's rights issue. And so when we do gender analysis, we look at, for example, with mining policy, with economic development policy, are we as women at the table? Are we also making sure that the policies that are developed look at the entire society and the inequalities that women in particular face? One of the examples that I want to describe with regards to the national response on the specific needs of women is the National Victims Reparations Fund. We all know that one of the key narratives around the conflict has been its impact on women, particularly around sexual violence. And the government set up a National Victims Reparations Fund to provide survivors of sexual violence financial compensation, other forms of support, including medical and psychological assistance. That's one particular approach. And at the same time, one of the security frameworks has been to make sure that we're integrating the discussions around small arms control with a gender lens. And so there's a Gender Equality Network for Small Arms Control, which is a global membership network focused on integrating gender perspectives into small arms control policies. And so this network comprises women's peace activists and other actors to make sure that we don't silo women's rights to just humanitarian issues and palliative approach. I think that it's important to mention the Women, Peace and Security Working Group, which is a global mechanism at the United Nations. And Congo also produces reports to the UN, in particular to the UN Security Council, with regards to the ways that the regional conflict is impacting women and the ways that the various peace accords can be better implemented. You mentioned in my introduction that I was part of an initiative back in 2013 through 2015 with regards to the previous peace accord, the 2013 peace accord. And so there is a whole mechanism around women being part of those negotiations. And it was called the Women's Platform for Peace and Security and Development. And so there were consultations to make sure that along all the different components and elements of the peace accord, that women were at the table and that women were also able to inform the implementation. The problem becomes you can have women's participation, but that doesn't mean there's going to be accountability from all parties that are involved. And so oftentimes women have not seen their recommendations implemented. And so there's definitely still a lot of work to do along that realm. I want to mention, some of the approaches that the women's rights organizations have been implementing to make sure that there are services offered to women. This includes what we call a one-stop center, which provides holistic support in terms of access to contraception, access to particularly emergency contraception, also post-exposure prophylaxis, because in the situation of rape, we want to make sure that women get that protective services and they don't have to go to multiple facilities to get that. And so there have been one-stop centers that have been established in various provinces that women are referred to in such a way that they can get all of their needs met. There's also a hotline, a national hotline, which has had a lot of publicity, and it's available to anyone. And on that hotline, women are able to get information with regards of where to go in their community. And so these are some of the approaches and mechanisms that women's rights groups have pushed for. Women's rights groups are often first responders in communities. They know the needs of women in their communities, and they're offering multiple services. They're offering multiple initiatives, including livelihoods. And so one of the advocacy messages is that foreign governments and humanitarian organizations actually need to partner more directly and provide funding directly to these women's rights organizations when you have a security crisis or when you have a humanitarian crisis. Because as women's rights organizations, women already know their communities. They know how to navigate. They're not going to pull out when it becomes too dangerous, like international humanitarian organizations. And so these are the conversations that are happening within foundations, within funding mechanisms, in terms of making sure that funding is flexible, that funding also is long-term and able to address the systemic needs of communities, and that there is trust that Congolese people know what we want to do, and we should be actors and not victims, and not just receivers of aid, but actually having a lot of agency in building our communities.
Great. You actually kind of touched upon my next question, because I know, I'm sure with your line of work, you've worked with, USAID or other development agencies in the West, and I think we've seen a trend that they are retreating that humanitarian assistance. So I don't know if you wanted, you kind of touched upon it, but like, what could transformative, sustainable investment look like, knowing that there's, some people will call it donor fatigue. In the US now, we have a leadership that it's been a political decision to do that. So kind of like any final thoughts there, anything you want to add, but you did touch upon it.
What donors are doing is that there's also a trend towards pooling resources. And so that donors are not necessarily implementing their own work, but they're talking to each other, and they're having a joint approach in such a way that there's better coordination. And there are also re-granting organizations in various countries. For example, in Congo, we have what's called the Fonds pour les femmes congolaises. It's a re-granting mechanism, so that is a Congolese-led foundation. And so the push for funding to allow those re-granting initiatives to actually become more impactful, to have more resources such that they can support communities in a way that's much more meaningful than if an international actor is doing it. There is a lot of local expertise in Congo. There is. I've seen this in terms of the expertise, in particular in the NGO sector. And this expertise definitely can be supported even more. And I think there's an approach to elevating also social enterprise approaches, and not just sort of a palliative approach to societal problems. And so you're seeing a lot of conversations across sectors, women's movements, with finance entities, with business, so that we don't work in silos, but collectively we think about sustainable approaches. And as Fred indicated, and as Dr. Ilunga indicated, really work on building our institutions. And so women are critical to those conversations.
So I have one final question before we open up to Q&A. So if anyone in the audience has questions, please put your questions in the chat. And so I mentioned again that I'm one of the co-founders of CDIS, which is focused on the diaspora. And so what role should the Congolese diaspora, where they're based? Again, I'm based in the US, there's folks in Canada. We also have diaspora across the African continent and Asia. So what should the diaspora play in the pursuit of peace and justice, particularly when it comes to advocacy? Muadi mentioned long-term sustainable, I would say, investment development, which the diaspora already does through remittances, but also in terms of any international pressure that they could provide. So kind of any thoughts from your vantage's point on the diaspora? What do you think?
Definitely.
You're not on mute, or so feel free to start. And then of course, Dr. Ilunga and Fred, please.
Sure. I mean, the diaspora has done a lot of work to work against that invisibility of the Congo that Fred mentioned. Over the last 30 years, working very, very hard to raise awareness and to also lobby decision makers in Washington or in other countries with regards to a more humane approach to the DRC and respect of DRC's territorial integrity and sovereignty. And so the diaspora has not been silent. And we've had protests, definitely since my 20s, I've been in every protest. And in the Congolese Studies Association, for example, the older generation of Congolese who founded the Congolese Studies Association are our academics who actually are activist academics. And so they were very much involved in the pro-democracy movement, in as much as they are professors in US and European institutions. We sometimes feel like we're not heard, but I think with advocacy, it has to be consistent, it has to be persistent, it has to be long-term, it has to be multi-pronged. And we also have to work across organizations. And so the Congolese Studies Association is very much coordinating with other entities so that we don't just have academics and stay in that that ivory tower, but we work with social movements. It's very important for us to work with youth movements and other initiatives in such a way that all of our voices come together.
Professor Ilunga, any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I think one thing I will add is that not everything is political, especially when you think about the potential contributions from the diaspora. I think an approach that is also sectoral is needed. What tends to obstruct many people in the diaspora's engagement is, I think, the political views of the crisis and situation in the DRC. But for instance, when you talk about the mining sector, you understand that it's not just only about the mining policies, but it's also about expertise that are needed in these particular sectors. Of course, we have the agricultural sector. So we have other domains of the DRC's economy and system that has not been touched yet. I always wonder what would be the time when we'll do serious investment in fishery. And of course, yes, we have many people with expertise in diaspora, but we don't think that could be a domain to invest in. So I think an approach that is sectoral is also needed. And two is, this goes back to institution, create an open line of communication between the DRC government. I know there are different point of institutions' responsibility. For instance, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where there is a section of diaspora engagement, even within the presidency's office. I think having a line of communication between DRC's players, actors, and people in the diaspora to facilitate or create an enabling environment where this exchange, and not only return, but also just exchange of expertise and appreciation of this expertise within the DRC ecosystem is valued. I think that could be the second thing, but I still believe that there is a room for improvement and engagement from people of diaspora in the Congo. We just have to identify that and operate in those domains.
Brett, do you have any commentary?
Yeah, actually nothing more than just what has been already said. The only thing I can add is that to be effective both in the expertise and in the advocacy, I think it's important that the Congolese diaspora develop itself as a sort of powerhouse by promoting, by helping people in the diaspora to be well integrated in the systems where they live, by amplifying their own voices. If you guys are visible in the US, then you can better influence the US policy into DRC, or you can better influence the business sector. And this is at least what we see with the Nigerians diaspora, and that's a very, very huge. Or with some small country, the Rwandan diaspora, to say the least. So, and I have to say, in my experience in the US, I have a lot of admiration to the CDIS for what you are doing. I think that's lacked a lot in the European Congolese diaspora, for example, or maybe I'm not very informed. But increasing the strength of the Congolese community where they are, in order to help them have a powerful voice is important, but also keeping or nourishing the connection with Congo, because I think the tendency sometimes is just to, forget about it. It's not gonna work. It's never gonna work. It will take generations. So why should we lose our time in trying to push for change there? But I think helping especially the second, the third generations of Congolese diaspora people to keep having that connection with Congo in one way or in another is very important. And one day I hope there will be more clear systems of attracting our diaspora as it is in other countries.
No, that's a good point. And so actually something CDIS did do, we did a return to Congo trip, our first one in late November, and we were all Congolese Americans, so first and a half gen, second gen. So hopefully we can, the goal is to do more of that in the future. So we have one question, because I do think you guys did such a great job touching such a broad scope of topics. So actually, then I think we'll do this question and then we'll allow you all to do closing remarks and then we'll end. So Carl Kananda asked, how can we build investment capacity in DRC that is historically and socially ethical? I don't know, whoever wants to go first. Maybe Professor, because I know you also, if I remember correctly, you studied at the University of Lubumbashi, so you bring that mining experience, but also, of course, with your academic work. So maybe I'm putting you on the spot first, but of course, Fred and Muadi, feel free to contribute as well.
Great. Well, thanks. I guess every economic environment has its own principles and its terms of engagement. I would be interested to maybe hear more about what the person means about ethical, but if transparency and accountability are the elements under that, I would say, yes, definitely we need to make sure that transparency from the tenders to getting the deals and the processes of investing are clear, not only on the legal side or the administrative side, but also on the, I would say, the social side, because the legality, the administrative steps may still be in place, but of course, once you get to the point of getting these deals, you start having these social conversations of giving me 50% or this amount. I think that is a conversation that we really need to have. So it's not all about establishing the legality and putting in place frameworks that seem to be clear and transparent on paper, but we also have to be honest enough to support and educate each other on strengthening the system by being transparent and ethically and morally acceptable. So that one. Two, I think it's also depend, I think to that question, it depends on the level of investment. If you want to invest big in the mining sector, definitely you will have serious, I think, challenges. And not only on the DRC side, but you also have to compete with outside players who have capital. And with that capital, for instance, I think Fred mentioned earlier the Chinese power. So they have capitals, and that capital will not just be about operationalizing their investment, but also getting people on their side, right? But it's another conversation if it's a small scale investment where you can easily do your work. And I think I want to make this point. We need to also move away from the culture of too big in terms of visibilities. And this is what I've seen, for instance, my own experiences. We start a small shop and we want that shop to appear automatically on all these platforms. And that's the biggest thing in town and in the city. And that, unfortunately, in the Congolese environment, may attract more, I think, than what you needed in terms of scrutinizing, including from rogue agent in certain departments and sectors. So I think one has to be strategic on how you embrace and approach the DRC. The DRC is another market by itself. Go low if your investment is low. Just establish your pillars with time and let your business build itself and build its own visibility. So that could be my, I think, advice or my suggestion.
Thank you so much. I don't know. Muadi, yep.
Yes, I do want to add to that. I think there's an opportunity just to have a bigger vision around what sustainable development looks like. I think that we cannot miss this opportunity to make sure that we support diversification of our economy. It's really, really critical that we do that beyond the mining sector, develop manufacturing, develop agriculture. We cannot continue to be a primarily single economy country. And at the same time, we need to support the transformation of our resources so that we add value to those resources. This leads to supporting industrialization. We really need that across the DRC, and many African countries have the same challenge. And again, so that we add value to them and can also create jobs, we can also raise substantial revenue through that type of approach. And so I hope that in this time that we're finding ourselves, that the Congo will more strongly advocate for itself so that we see a different type of engagement and vision for systemic economic reform, and that will impact everyone across the country. And I think it will also impact some of the corruption, when there are so few opportunities that occur. And so offering many channels for people to have job security and for us to move to a fully industrialized nation, I think will be a step in the right direction.
Well, Fred, actually, we had one more question come in, and I think it could actually, you could maybe be the one answering, but of course, Muadi could also contribute because of CSA's academic and activist nature. So Grady Garuka asked, so a young Congolese student is trying to create a platform that connects silos of resistance from Congolese in the diaspora, Congolese who fled home, or even Congolese home, with all the different organizations and movements for freeing Congo. So what are the challenges that you can envision in such a centralized network? But I think what Grady's getting at is there's all these folks that are energized around making a difference, but how do you maybe integrate efforts and synergies? So would welcome your thoughts there to answer Grady's question.
Based on my movement experience, at least, the first thing I would say is that you should always consider that perfect should not be the enemy of the good. What you need is to have a movement, to have something moving. You will not agree on everything. I know in these building coalitions, you want to agree on every detail, and then people start arguing at the third event, and then you by the fifth you are not able to do anything. In my view, and based on, for example, my experience with Lucha, the principles, the 2, 3, 4 principles for all the group should be agreed upon, and then the focus should be on action. Every group in the university or in the professional group should have the freedom of acting as long as they are going in the same direction. But if you want to organize something which you need to agree on everything, then at some point it's not gonna go very, very far. So focusing on action, allowing, accepting that some mistake may be made, learning from, creating spaces to learn from those mistakes, and agree to have divergence, but to move ahead with that. The creating coalition should not be to silence diversity of opinion, but the end goal should be clear. The way to get there can go through different direction.
Great. Muadi, any other thoughts?
I think there are opportunities not only for advocacy organizations, but also community development initiatives. And so one of the things that I'm involved in is an initiative called Community Empowerment Professional Partners. And it brings together several community-based organizations that are implementing programs in rural areas. And we come together to share experiences. And that is a space for us to also share strategies. And so if there's one strategy or program that's being implemented, say in Maniema, maybe another organization in Lomami would be able to learn from it and also adapt it. And so that's that learning that can happen across all the multiple initiatives that we know. There's a lot of thirst for people to do something, for the Congolese diaspora to do something. We can exchange experiences with each other. And then in terms of advocacy, there's an opportunity for us to also hone our talking points very clearly, and then also decide and know which targets are really critical. For example, the Africa Subcommittee in Congress, and knowing specifically where we need to target our messages such that the Congolese diaspora is heard and we're not silent, or we're not considered silent.
Right. No, thank you so much, Muadi. As a former congressional staffer, that is definitely a gap that I noticed. And so I wanted to allow you all, if you wanted to provide any final parting words or insights, or maybe the website to your organizations, kind of wanted to give you all the floor before we close.
Yes, for the Congolese Studies Association, please go to congolese-studies.org. We would be very interested to have not only academics, but human rights activists, youth movements, and other actors to join us and to be part of our movement. And in terms of any kind of last thoughts with regards to gender, just really pushing the point that gender should not be a standalone approach, that it really should be integrated into everything that we do and mainstreamed throughout all the development and peace initiatives that are implemented in the Congo. And also, we need to also think about security that exists not just at the national level, but exists at the personal level, and work at all of those levels in terms of making that transformative shift that's needed in the Congo.
A professor, how about you?
Great, thanks a lot. I just have 5 quick points, and I'll be brief, I promise. The first one is that looking at the geopolitics, it's clear that the issues of Congo is a global issue. So therefore, we need a global responsibility. to address whatever is happening in the DRC on the security level, but also on the social and economic level. Two, I think we need to advance and support inclusive human rights approaches, which is key. And I think at that point, I definitely agree with Muadi, as she said, issues of women's rights should not be isolated. It has to be part of the national, inclusive and holistic conversation that we need to have, and programs need to be advanced on that front. Three, I think, and this goes now to Congo, I think we need to know and have a clear Congo vision with a Congolese commitment to that vision. Of course, we can still have many partners around the world who would want to support the DRC, but until there is a clear Congo vision and commitment from Congolese, these other partners will never help enough. And four, I think we need to look at the level of education system that we have in place, which goes from curriculums to investment in education, look at the budget that we have at national level, but also the types of skills that we advance and provide to the Congolese. And four, I think this is very much in line with education, is human resources. We need to focus on building capabilities, skills, which are relevant to the global need, but are very also relevant to the future of the Congo. And lastly, this is not point 6, but we need to develop a national development plan that is clear, transparent, and with language that are easily understandable by people at a very local level with limited literacies. Those will be my concluding points. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Fred.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you again for organizing this and other talks. I think they are very helpful, and I would just recommend the CDIS to use all the Congolese officials who are going through DC and New York these days to bring them to talk to Congolese diaspora, because I think it is important, including on investment and economic progress and fiscal issues that limit many of the people who want to invest in DRC. And the second thing is the current conflict look like, if you look from here, at least sometimes it look like the war is ending. But I think we have a unique opportunity to rebuild a different regional economy, a different strong, to reform our institutions. And if we want to be serious about reclaiming Congolese leadership in the region, we need the voice of people here in DRC and in the diaspora to push the government and to work together to bring most of the changes that Madam Muadi and Ilunga talk about. So I hope we don't lose hope, but at least we keep working toward that progress. If you want to read about the Ebuteli work, you can go to www.ebuteli.org. And if there are some people in the diaspora who want to support grassroots organization in Goma, I think they can go to Goma Active pages on Twitter, and other social media. They are doing great work even in the time of occupation, and I think they will appreciate some support.
Thank you so much, Fred, Muadi, Professor Ilunga. I think this conversation again reminds us that Congo's path to peace and stability requires not just policy, but of course, ethical leadership, empowered communities, and the willingness to have uncomfortable discussions, which we, I think, started today. And then also, as Professor Ilunga mentioned, it also a global discussion as well. You know, Congo impacts not just the rest of Africa, but but the rest of the world. So we wanted to thank, again, our panelists for their incredible insight. Thank you all for joining us on a Saturday. I know you could be doing other things, so very appreciative of that. And then again, as I think Fred and everyone alluded, that this is the beginning of a conversation. So we hope to have many more of this kind. And then we mentioned that our next Congo chat will be on the Congolese mining ecosystem, which I think, was a topic of discussion as well. So thank you again for all of your time and wishing you all a great rest of the weekend. All right, bye everyone.
Thank you.